Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, it's kind of an opinion piece. We're discussing, should Thailand be held hostage? And held hostage by what? Well, by this whole situation, all of this pandemic situation, all of these, quite frankly, I think one could say the government response to the pandemic. And this is just one man's opinion, but last year, I really got the feeling Thailand was sort of taking a Thai approach to dealing with all of this. And frankly, in 2020, I was not thrilled by having to go through all of this. And my opinion is just one person's opinion. But I do tend to think that a few people seem to kind of be on the same wavelength with me. I'll put it that way. That said, it felt like it was much more of a Thai approach to things. And in recent months, I'm starting to kind of feel like, or it seems to me, that sort of international notions have crept in to certain policy aspects of what we're doing here with respect to the government response to this pandemic situation. And what I mean is, I just don't think notions of COVID passes and, this sort of constant operating by decrees that change very quickly and have tremendous impacts on the economy, down to the basic level, the SME economy of Thailand. It looks to me, based on, the roughly 14 years I've lived in Thailand, going on 14 years I lived in Thailand, that this is foreign. I hesitate to say influence, but this is a foreign paradigm, in my opinion. And I don't know why. China is China, that they do what they do, but the Western world, in my opinion, has just gone hysterically insane. And in many jurisdictions that were once very reasonable in how they dealt with situations and operated to try to find the best way forward using a cost-benefit analysis, they've just lost that. And I don't understand why. Countries like, I'm not even going to name, blaming and naming and shaming, that's not the point. I'll just say the West. There's a number of jurisdictions in the West that I think have just really gone off the deep end. And I don't even know what wavelength they're on. And what makes me sort of sad is, one thing I love about Thai history, and I like to think that I'm pretty up on Thai history, it's kind of one of the reasons that caused me to become a Thai, is Thailand always looks to her own self-interest and does it well. I've always enjoyed this about Thai history. You go back to the turn of the 20th century, going into the 20th century, and you had some very well-executed strategy that was utilized to essentially, for lack of a better term, evade colonialism. And it was done really well. It was done quite skillfully. And when you look back on that area, on that sort of arena of history, that part of history out this way, that was not done easily. There was a great deal of nerve and intellect that was needed to sort of navigate some really choppy waters at the time. And then you get into sort of the era of the world wars. And again, Thailand navigated that very deftly. Now, at the end of the Second World War, especially out here in the Pacific, things were not real great. But in my opinion, Thailand came out of that probably as good as any country in this part of the world could have expected to come out of that. Then you get into the Cold War era, and again, Thailand forges its own path and, in my opinion, made the right moves. It wasn't exactly non-aligned, but it sought its own national self-interest, and it executed it capably. Long story, I'm kind of, you're kind of hearing me preach to the choir. I have the fervency of the converted, as they say. But what worries me now is that these notions of, these Western notions with respect to lockdown, which to me, and we've gone over this in other videos, there does not seem to be an overabundance of data that supports the notion that there's any efficacy to these really draconian measures that we know. What we do know is they have a devastating effect economically. We know that. That's just clear. You can see it anecdotally when you walk around outside here in Bangkok. The point I'm trying to get at is maybe it's time, to at least some degree, for Thailand to look at the situation for herself and maybe try to determine her own path based on her own analysis, because quite frankly, it's worked in the past, and I think it can work again. Just as a for example, and I've done a video, I've been pretty clear, I'm not a fan of these, this so-called COVID pass and all of this nonsense, but we're going into September, we're sort of looking on the horizon, this may be a possibility. But something that just didn't make any sense to me, a recent article from the Pattaya Mail, that's pattayamail.com, article is titled, Thailand's Tourism Ministry aims to reopen whole country by next January. Quoting directly, Minister Pipat Ratchakitprakarn said Bangkok was scheduled to reopen in October as part of the second phase, but this phase has been delayed to November as the majority of residents will not receive their second vaccine dose until the end of October. Well, as we've noted in prior videos on this channel, they're bringing online a supposedly what's going to be a system which will require those for example, dine-in in restaurants in Bangkok to present documentation that they're vaccinated. Well, how do you do that if they don't project this to be possible until November? That's a big, so why bring a system online that's only going to detrimentally impact the economy, and that here in September, we're doing without it. So why do we need that in October? My question. And then more to the point, or to sort of get to the bigger point, I'm going to go ahead and put some data up here. So I did a Google search, just a basic Google search on the population of Thailand. And we'll go ahead and throw that up on the screen. You can see it. It's from the World Bank. And it says the population of Thailand is 69.63 million people, approximately. Okay, let's just presume that. And then I went ahead and went to Johns Hopkins University, and the web address for that is coronavirus.jhu.edu/data/mortality. And for Thailand, total cases, 1,265,082. And then total deaths, you've got 12,631 for a total mortality of 1%, and then deaths per 100,000, 18.14. So the reason I bring this up is when we did we went ahead and did the math, and we said, okay, 1.2 million, 1,265,082 against Thailand's total population. That brings it to 0.0181686,342. So 1.8% of the population of Thailand has come down with COVID. That's what's recorded. And there is a difference between what's called case fatality rate and infection fatality rate. Cases are things that you know about somebody's infected. Infection fatality rate is where they try to surmise how many infections probably have occurred that they don't know about, and then they take that against how many people have died with it. And so there's a different thing to look at there. But we're just looking at case fatality rate here. So, and case fatality rate usually is a higher number. Usually, I'm not getting into statistics here, it's our understanding, usually it's a higher number than infection fatality rate. But as noted, according to Johns Hopkins, so 1.8% of the population has contracted COVID. That's what's on record. Of that number, so that's 1.8% of the total population, then of that 1.8%, 1% has died from it. The point I'm trying to make, and just to compare, again, we've got this from Johns Hopkins University, United States, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to go through all the data, no point to it, but their deaths per 100,000 is 197.45, And then you compare that to the United Kingdom, and I think that's a more accurate comparison because demographically it's much more similar to Thailand, albeit it's not geographically similar, and I often wonder if cold weather maybe has something to do with all of this, but that's just my own speculation. But 199.72 deaths per 100,000 in the United Kingdom against Thailand's 18.14, which again, I'm not trying to belittle any of these numbers. I've been accused of that before. That's not my point. My point is 1% of 1.8% of the total population have died from this in Thailand. And yet we're making major changes with respect to just the basic liberties that Thais are used to having. Meanwhile, and this is what actually scares me more, it's the notion of sort of being hostage to this whole thing. And what I'm talking about here is, I'm here to tell you, having discussed this with clients and with folks that are in the business community here in Thailand, it's not so much the lockdown, it's the uncertainty of how many more lockdowns are we going to have, if any. And I have to say, coming out of this latest round, or we're in sort of the early dawn of, after coming out of the dark night of this past summer here in Thailand of this lockdown, if another lockdown is forthcoming, I don't know how the economy comes back. And this is not me trying to express an opinion. I really can't figure that one out, because the biggest thing that that I've kind of surmised from what folks have told me is it's the uncertainty. A lot of people have said, if I had known the way that this was going to play back in March of 2020, I would have just shut down my business then. I just would have been done. And I know many businesses that probably, may not reopen, at least not initially, coming off of the latest lockdown, because they don't know when it's going to end. They don't know when the next one is coming. And having that kind of sort of Damocles hanging over the economy sort of perpetually, that's a problem, and because an economy needs confidence. And we can't regain that kind of confidence until we're reasonably well assured that we're not going to have to deal with this again. Again, I don't know what the answer is precisely, but I think we have to start thinking about this stuff moving forward.